You've seen it before. Maybe only once, maybe more than that. A bird in your yard, completely flat on the ground. Wings spread wide and pressed against the earth, feathers fanned out at angles that don't look right. Head tilted sideways, bill open, eyes half closed, not moving, and your stomach dropped. I thought the same thing for a long time. I thought what most people think when they see a bird lying that it was dying, or hurt, or that something had hit it. The first time I saw it, I was in my backyard in Northern Virginia, coffee going warm in my hand, when I spotted a mourning dove stretched flat across the flagstones near the garden bed. Wings draped over the stone like they'd lost all tension, head down and sideways. I had the back door open in about 4 seconds. The dove flew away before I reached her. Most people don't know this. That dove was not in distress. She was not dying. She was not asking for anything except to be left alone. What I was watching, what most people have never been told they're watching, is one of the most deliberate, purposeful things a bird does in your yard. Almost every warm morning, often in plain sight, almost always mistaken for an emergency. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave. Today we're going deep on one behavior, just one, the flat-winged, spread eagle. Looks like dead posture that birds hold in the open while you watch through your window, wondering whether to call someone. Stay until the end, because the last thing I have to say about this is the one I struggle to put into words. The research doesn't fully reach it, but I think it might be one of the truest things you can learn about the birds that come to your yard. Start with what you're actually seeing. The bird is pressed down, not fallen, pressed in a way that erases its usual silhouette entirely. The upright posture is gone. The folded wings are gone. Instead, wings spread away from the body at odd angles, feathers fanned and sometimes fluffed, the leading edge of each wing touching the ground. The tail might be fanned out too. The head is usually tilted sideways, one eye pointed up toward the sky. The bill is open. The eyes have a distant, half-lidded quality. It does not look like a living bird. I completely understand why you panic. What makes it unsettling is this: the bird is not trying to get away from you. Normally, any bird in your yard is running a constant calculation. How close can this person get before I need to leave? Researchers who study this call it FID, flight initiation distance. For most songbirds in a suburban yard, that number sits somewhere between 10 and 20 feet under ordinary conditions. Come within 15 feet of a northern cardinal at your feeder on a Tuesday morning, and it's gone before your hand touches the door. But when a bird is doing what I'm about to describe, that number collapses dramatically. I've stood 4 feet from an American robin sunning on my flagstones, the same robin that would flush at 12 feet on any other morning, and watched her look right at me and hold still. Not because she couldn't fly. Because she was busy. That's the first thing to hold on to. The bird's apparent helplessness is not a signal that something is wrong. It's a signal that you've stumbled into something else entirely. This is not injury. This is not illness. This is not distress. This is a bird that has deliberately chosen to enter one of the most physically vulnerable states it ever occupies, wings open, belly exposed, senses partly turned down, in the open, in your yard, because the yard is safe enough to allow it. The question isn't why it looks like it's dying. The question is why any creature whose entire survival architecture is built around speed and escape and constant alertness would ever choose to do this at all. The answer turns out to be 2 things, and one of them the ornithologists are still arguing about. I used to rush out every time. I thought that was what you did. You saw a bird down, you went to it. I know better now, and the knowing started with understanding what the bird is actually doing. The first answer is heat. Not warmth in the casual sense, but heat as a maintenance tool. The behavior has a name: dorsal sunning. Birders have been documenting it for over 100 years, and most of us who spend enough time at the window eventually figure out it's not a death posture. What took longer to understand was exactly why birds do it, and the picture that's come together over the last few decades is more specific than most people expect. Pay attention to this. A single flight feather on a mourning dove is made up of hundreds of barbs, each one lined with smaller barbules, each barbule carrying microscopic hooks that zip the whole structure together into a surface rigid enough to move air. When that structure breaks down, when the hooks loosen, when the barbules mat and separate, the feather stops working, lift suffers, insulation fails, waterproofing goes. A bird with seriously degraded feathers is in real danger, and feathers degrade constantly. From use, from moisture, from time. One of the things that degrades them is bacteria. Specific strains, mostly bacillus, that literally live on feather keratin and consume it. Work coming out of the University of Cambridge has shown they do measurable structural damage to the feathers. And this is where the sun comes in. Ultraviolet radiation suppresses them. When a bird spreads its feathers flat in direct sunlight, what looks like collapse is actually something closer to a disinfectant cycle. Then there's the ectoparasite angle. Ectoparasites are the mites and lice that live on the outside of a bird, in the feathers, at the feather bases, against the skin. A healthy backyard songbird might be carrying anywhere from a few dozen to several hundred feather mites at any given moment. Heat doesn't kill these parasites outright, but when a bird spreads dark feathers across direct sunlight, the temperature under those feathers climbs enough to make mites uncomfortable. They move toward the wing edges. The bird then reaches them during preening. Spread, bake, preen. The whole sequence, start to finish, can take up to 40 minutes, and then there's simple thermoregulation, the plainest version of the story. A black-capped chickadee weighs 11 grams, 2 pennies. It burns through metabolic energy at a rate that would exhaust most animals its size. On a cool spring morning in your yard, a bird lying flat in the first hour of real sun is doing something economically rational. It's collecting free heat before the day asks anything of it. All three of these have one thing in common. They require the bird to be still, open, and exposed for several minutes at a time. Your yard has to feel safe enough to permit that. I want to come back to that. That's the first answer. The second one is stranger. Let's talk about anting. This is where the behavior gets harder to explain. Anting comes in two versions. Active anting is when a bird picks up a live ant, often a carpenter ant or something in the Formicinae subfamily that produces formic acid, and rubs it deliberately against its own feathers. The bird holds the ant in its bill and works it along the leading edge of its wing, drawing the ant systematically through the feather structure, sometimes twisting the whole body sideways to reach the right angle. It looks almost compulsive. It looks like the bird cannot stop. Passive anting is what you're more likely to see in your yard. The bird finds an active ant colony, a mound, a disturbed trail, lies flat across it, wings spread, and holds still while the ants crawl up through its feathers. The ants, agitated and defensive, spray formic acid. The bird is using that acid. About 200 species of birds have been documented doing this, going back in the ornithological literature to the 1930s. With detailed surveys now cataloged through Cornell Lab of Ornithology. American robins do it. Blue jays do it. And blue jays do it with a full body, committed involvement that stops you mid-step. Starlings do it. American crows, common grackles, northern cardinals, less often, but it's in the record. The behavior crosses so many species and so many families that ornithologists are confident it's serving a real purpose. The leading hypothesis is ectoparasite control. Formic acid is toxic to many of the mites and lice that live on feathers, and research in the Journal of Avian Biology has found correlations between anting frequency and parasite load in multiple species. What the science says is that formic acid applied to feather surfaces suppresses parasites under controlled conditions. What it does not say, what it can't cleanly say yet, is whether the doses deposited during natural anting are consistently high enough to matter in the field. But this is where the picture gets messier, and honestly more interesting. Birds will ant with things that are not ants. Millipedes that produce cyanide compounds, citrus peel, smoke from campfires, mothballs. There's at least one documented case of a European starling anting with a lit cigarette butt, working it through its wing feathers with the same deliberate motion. If the behavior were purely about formic acid and parasite control, you'd expect birds to be specific about their tools. Instead, they seem to be selecting for any substance that produces a strong chemical irritant and applying it to their feathers with intent. This is not random behavior. This is not confusion. This is not a bird mistaking an anthill for safe ground. This is about 200 species across dozens of families, all arriving at the same solution for the same problem, through methods that seem to involve some kind of learned material choice, which leads some researchers to a second hypothesis, that anting feels good, that the chemical stimulation, the formic acid, the contact, the heat, produces a reward response in the bird's nervous system that keeps them returning to it, a way of scratching an itch they cannot reach any other way. I don't know what to do with that, honestly. But I keep coming back to it. This is the part that gets uncomfortable. I want to say it plainly. You now know that a bird lying flat on your flagstones isn't in danger. But what I wish someone had told me 5 years ago is that most of the actual harm that comes to these birds comes from us, from people trying to help. When you pick up a sunning or anting bird, you trigger a stress response that is real, measurable in the blood. A bird handled by a human experiences a cortisol spike comparable to what it would face under a predator attack. Heart rate spikes. Adrenaline flushes. If the bird was in the middle of an anting sequence, it has to reset a process that can take up to 40 minutes to complete. If it had reached the settled, low alert state that makes sunning possible, being grabbed returns it to full alarm in an instant. I want to be honest about something. In October 2 years ago, I almost made exactly this mistake. A female cardinal was flat on my flagstones, wings spread, head tilted sideways, not responding to me standing 3 feet away. I had my hands halfway out. Something made me stop, a flicker of something half remembered. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, completely uncertain about what I was seeing. And then she stood up, ruffled her feathers, shook herself the way a dog shakes after a bath, and flew directly to the feeder. I learned the hard way, or almost the hard way, that the bird's apparent helplessness is not an invitation. It is not a call for rescue. It is the bird trusting the world enough, right in that moment, to let its defenses down. And the most helpful thing you can do is not confirm it was right to the rule. According to Cornell Lab of Ornithology and every wildlife rehabilitator I've read on this, a bird that is sunning or anting will fly when it's ready. Give it up to 30 minutes. If after 30 minutes it still cannot fly, if you see one wing held at an asymmetric angle when it stands, if it walks in circles, if there's a visible wound, then it may need help. But the bird that's flat and still on a warm morning in the sun, what it needs from you is nothing. Watch it. Leave the yard. Watch it from inside. There's something else I want to be careful about, because the honest version of this story includes where the science runs out. Some birds sun on overcast days when ultraviolet levels are low and the thermoregulation gains are minimal. Some birds sun for far longer than the bacteria or parasite control explanations seem to require. Some birds sun when they're not in heavy molt, not under visible parasite pressure, not cold, when there's no obvious maintenance reason at all. Research reviewed in Current Biology and work coming out of the University of California, Davis suggests that some sunning behavior may be more about psychological state than physical maintenance. The science calls this comfort behavior, a clinical name for something much simpler. It's a cluster of things, bathing, preening, sunning, that birds only do when they feel completely safe, not when they're cold or infected, when they feel safe. I'm not going to tell you yes, and I'm not going to tell you no about what that means. But I think it changes the picture of what you're watching when a bird lies flat in your yard. I want to tell you about the pileated woodpecker. I've saved this for last because it has to be last. I see this bird on my oak tree maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, crow-sized, that red crest, the kind of bird that makes you set down whatever you're holding and just look. This past March, on one of those cold, bright mornings just before the trees had come into leaf, I watched it land on the south-facing bark of the oak and then do something I'd never seen it do before. It spread one wing out, pressed it flat against the bark, turned its head sideways, one eye toward the sky, bill slightly open. 6 minutes. I watched the whole thing. I've seen sunning and robins and doves and jays so many times now that I've lost the old reflex to panic. But watching the pileated hold, that posture on the bark of the oak in the cold March light, stopped me in a way I didn't expect. Because what you're watching, when you've done this long enough to finally know what you're looking at, is something specific. You're watching a bird be completely at ease. This animal, this creature that lives every hour of its life at some level of alertness, that reads the air for changes, that sleeps with part of its brain still awake, is choosing right now in your yard to lower every alarm it carries, to press itself against the bark or the ground or the flagstone and just receive what the morning has. To be, for a few minutes, not a vigilant animal, but a warm thing in the sun. I don't have great words for this. The science calls it comfort behavior. That's accurate and also completely inadequate. The morning you see a bird sunning in your yard, and you hold still instead of running outside, and the bird stays 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, that is not you watching the yard. That is the yard including you. A bird's willingness to do that, within range of everything you've been to it over months or years, means something about the space you've built. About how your yard reads from inside a set of eyes that are running a calculation you can't fully see. I think about how long it took me to become the kind of person who could watch a bird lie flat on the ground for 10 minutes, without running out to try and fix it. If that bird lying flat in your grass used to scare you, and now it doesn't, you've learned something real about these animals and about this particular way of paying attention. And I think, at some level, the birds figured that out before you did. You might see it tomorrow, or next week, on a warm, still morning after the cold breaks, when the light hits the south side of your yard at a low angle and something flat-winged and open catches your eye from the kitchen window. You'll know what it is now. Leave the coffee on the counter. Stand at the window. Watch the whole thing from start to finish. Watch the bird stand back up and shake itself. Watch the feathers resettle. Watch it flick its wings once and go back to wherever it was headed. I find that I look for it now, on mornings when everything else feels like too much. Not as a sign, not as a message, just as a thing that happens in the world. A bird, quiet and open in the sunlight, not asking anything from the morning except to be in it. Has a bird ever done this right in front of you, close enough that you held your breath or reached for it before you caught yourself? Tell me what species it was and how long it stayed. Drop yours below. What you noticed, what you tried. I read everyone. Take care of the birds out there, and I'll talk to you in the next one.